Hi, my name is Christine Church, and this is my beautiful horse, Kobeejo. Welcome to our channel. Today I'd like to talk about a subject that, to my knowledge, has never been addressed before. And that is being autistic and owning a horse that has to be boarded. Anybody who understands autism, especially high-functioning autism, which is also called Asperger's, will get this, will understand. For the rest of you, I have high-functioning autism. I also have a horse. My horse came to me at a really, really difficult time when I was on the proverbial edge of just ending it. It has been very difficult for me. I'm 56 years old and I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism about 5 years ago. My life growing up was a living hell. And it hasn't really gotten that much better in certain ways. In other ways it has, and in some ways it hasn't. Now, where I'm going with this is that with high-functioning autism, we have a lack of, not just a lack of social skills, but a lack of understanding when someone isn't forthright and comes right to us and says, this is the way it is. You know, this is the way things have to be. This is what you have to do. Often people are obscure in, trying not to be rude, maybe. I'm not really sure. All I know is that my entire life, I've always wanted a horse. I've always had a lot of passion for horses. Now, if you know anything again about high-functioning autism, autistics tend to get very passionate about something, a very specific subject. And since mine was, it's cats and horses, both. But in this case, I'm only going to talk about horses. Growing up, I didn't know why I was so different. Our brains think so much differently than the neurotypical person who is non-autistic. And we really have a hard time understanding subtlety. So part of the problem with that is that once I got my horse, who came to me in a very interesting way, and I'm writing a memoir about him. Once I got him, he saved me. And he has been my light ever since. He is my light. The people at the barns that I have had to board at, on the other hand, some have been a treasure. I can name some people who, to this day, I'm still close with, who understood that I was not like them, that I was different, and they accepted me for who I was. And when something would happen, when I would seem to argue but not argue, sometimes when we're trying to get something across, we sound like we're arguing, or at least this is my case. All autistics are different, and some may be very quiet. Unfortunately for me, I have a big mouth. And I've always done a lot of talking in the respect of thinking that, okay, if I explain, then everybody's going to understand and accept me for who I am and accept my situation. But that has been anything but the case. All right, kindergarten, through 5th grade, I was, you know, I didn't seem to really have a lot of problems. I did have my friends, and we were usually horse obsessed together. I had some friends that had horses, would teach me things, let me ride, different things like that. Once I went into 6th grade, where I had to switch schools, things changed a lot. Because I was different and did not respond to things in the same way, and because I'm extremely emotional, you know, my emotions do come out, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. Sometimes it's like having Tourette's, where things just come out your mouth and you can't control it. It's in your brain, and it's not a disease, it's a disorder. And if you want to even call it that, I know today a lot of autistics are not even liking to call, you know, call it a disorder. It's just a different way of being, a different way of thinking. As for me, I've always had a high intelligence level, and when I have a passion for something, I tend to study it, learn it, obsess about it, until I get to know everything I can possibly know about it. And in that respect, I mean, that's a pretty good thing, in the sense that I can help people if they're having a problem with something. Usually, not always, but usually I know the answer. And if I don't know it, I can often find it quickly and easily and understand it immediately, even with just one sentence. So it is a very different, our brains can see and perceive things that the normal brain, if you want to use the word normal, I mean, what's normal, brain doesn't see. I do have a picture here of an autistic brain versus a non-autistic brain, and I'll get to that in a little bit. You'll see there's a huge difference. As for having a horse, loving horses, of course, in my mind, you know, I had to have the land, I had to have the property. I didn't even know about boarding facilities until after this major breakdown that I had, and afterwards I decided I wanted to take horseback riding lessons, because even though I knew about horses, most things about horses, I didn't have the confidence. I could ride, but I didn't have a lot of confidence. So I thought, okay, I will start taking horseback riding lessons. And I went to a place that I had frequented as a child, and by this time it was privately owned, a public boarding facility, but privately owned, and they offered lessons. So I started taking them. While I was there, I noticed that most of the people there were not rich, that, you know, for a certain price a month you could board your horse and come in, you know, either they would take care of it or whatever. So by this time I decided, okay, you know, at that time I had a job, which is something I was never able to hold down in my entire life, and the only reason I was able to keep that job was because the boss was just the nicest guy in the world. He understood that I had this difference about me, and he let me leave if I needed to leave. He let me work from home. He let me do what was comfortable for me and for my schedule. Anyway, so since I did have this job, I had enough money to buy and board a horse, and I bonded with this horse immediately, and I knew that he was the one. I knew he was like a soulmate, like meeting someone and just knowing. Okay, so I bought him, and I brought him to this first barn, and as time went on, I started to learn more and more and more about horse care and about what his needs were. And I started to see that the rules and some of the, just different things within the barn and the way I was treated by specific people was just not meshing. For instance, this particular barn locks the barn up every night. Closes, locks, you're not allowed in. In the summer, when my horse had to be in his stall, which usually I just left him outside with all the other, there were horses that lived outside, horses that lived inside. Most of the time they owned him, he lived outside, which was wonderful for him. At that time he was able to be out on pasture. He loved being with all the other horses. I don't think he'd ever actually been a horse, in a herd before. So to him, that was, he was amazingly happy. And that was wonderful. But then once fall came, he got very sick because he had always been a barn horse. And his body just couldn't acclimate to living outside, growing a coat, like the other horses. So I had to bring him in. And I had to start doing, at that time, they only had full board. So I started doing full board. That was when I started to notice problems. Their hours were very strict, and they would close on certain days, so you couldn't even go in to take care of your horse or to see your horse. The stalls wouldn't get cleaned. I started to see all these things. Plus there were people there that were starting to I was clashing with them, and it was almost like going back to 6th grade when I was suddenly cast into this different world of kids who didn't understand me, didn't understand my disability, if you want to call it that. And I was bullied and picked on, and it was horrible. And it got worse and worse and worse as I went through school. By the time I was in 10th grade, I quit. I couldn't do it. It was so horrible for me that I can't even put into words. It was like living in hell. So, time went on and all that stuff. I went from relationship to relationship. I started to, I'd always been a writer. I started writing about cats in the 90s. I finally got a book published in the late 90s, my first book, and then several others followed, and things were okay at that time. By the time I got to the point where I was like, okay, it's time I got a horse, I was in my late 30s, and I got this wonderful horse, and that's when all this came about. So we moved. I found another barn through a friend of my mother's who worked at a tack shop for the people who owned the barn, who had owned the barn previously. They had sold it, and the guy who bought it was looking for boarders. And it was a co-op situation where we all worked together to take care of our horses. And it was wonderful. It was inexpensive, so it was definitely affordable. Again, my horse still didn't have any issues, so he was out on a big pasture of grass with his friend. My friend's horse, they were bonded together. Everything was going quite well until my horse developed what's called laminitis because apparently the grass was too rich. And I mean, who knows why horses can get laminitis from a lot of different things, a lot of different reasons. And that is, in the hoof, there's soft tissue called lamina, and it gets inflamed. And it can eventually lead to founder, which is when the coffin bone, which is the bone in the hoof, drops, which, if it goes too far, can be deadly. He got this laminitis. All of a sudden I had to change everything. I had to change his diet. He couldn't go out in that pasture anymore. I had to change him to, there was just all these things that weren't working. I tried a different barn, but that barn, the paddocks were so small he could not move. He and his friend stood side by side in these little tiny pens and could play over the fences, but, nose to nose, and that was it. And so, needless to say, I went back to the other place because that was, 2 weeks of just, they also wouldn't let me feed my horse in the way that I know a horse needs to be fed. They charged me extra if I needed extra hay. I was already paying for an outrageous amount because it was a full board, meaning that they take care of everything, but they weren't. They were doing things I was asking them not to do, and I was so scared my horse was going to get sick again. So, again, I went back to the other place, and I stayed there for a few years. But one thing led to another, and they changed over to full board, and I had to move him down to another area. Everything just went wrong. And, where he was, it was very muddy, which is very bad for his feet. I tried everything, and I was there for 4.5 years trying everything to just, keep my horse healthy. So eventually I heard about another barn that was up the street that was looking for boarders. Full board, but they were a reasonable price. So my friend and I moved up there. And that was a really nice place. It was affordable. I worked there to offset, little bits of the board. It was an enjoyable time. The only thing that at that point started to become a problem was that I have always done my work, my writing, and anything else that I do, like my videos. I'm doing this, I'm a night owl, I'm nocturnal. I've never been able to change that. In school, that was one of the things that made it so miserable, was getting up in the morning because I would not be able to sleep at night. So that, it was just one thing after another. And I'm not going to go through all the barns that we moved to. Needless to say that one thing after another led me from barn to barn to barn. And it was usually because, for whatever reason, they couldn't meet my needs as a horse owner for my horse. And I started to do more research, and I actually discovered, and this is sad, this is a very sad fact, but I discovered that, I don't know the numbers, I'm going to guess on a percentage, just based on my observation, 85% of people who owned horses did not take proper care of them. They would be out in pens with just dirt. They would only get tiny amounts of hay. They would get big amounts of grain, which is definitely the wrong way to feed a horse. They weren't made that way. They are grazers. They're meant to move and to eat. Now, I got to the point, obviously, my horse was having issues. He was diagnosed insulin resistant at that time, so he could no longer have the grass that he could before. So he had to go on a low NSC hay. And all these things I can describe in another video in my horse channel. It was like a friend of mine. She was wonderful. And she invited me to go board up with her. at her private place. She had 2 horses, I had 1. You know, she was ready to build my horse his own paddock next to her horses so that his wouldn't have as much grass and he could still see her horses. It worked out well until she died. She had cancer. And that really hurt. That I lost a beautiful place and a beautiful friend. And it was very, you know, throughout all of this, I had been trying to make friends. I had been trying to get people to, I've been trying to fit in without being able to fit in. I couldn't seem to grasp the concept or accept the concept that not everybody wants to be your friend. I know that now, but it took me a long time to learn that. And I'm okay with that now. I've actually learned quite a bit through this experience in what, you know, that there's certain things I just have to accept. But there's other things that are hard to accept, you know, or almost impossible for an autistic person to be able to do in the same way as a regular person, you know, someone without autism. And one of those things, a big thing is that with autism, we're very specific. If you've ever seen the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, and if you haven't, watch it. It's a really good movie. Now, Dustin Hoffman's character plays an autistic man. According to today's autism spectrum, he would be on a lower spectrum. But back then, he was on the high functioning spectrum. He was verbal, he could just dress himself, things like that. But he still displayed the behaviors of someone with autism. He also had this ability to be able to see numbers in things, like if something was dropped, he'd know how many numbers. You know, in one scene in the movie, they drop a box of matches, he knows exactly how many number of matches fell on the floor, even though it's in the hundreds. He knew it just looking at it. Now, this isn't a real case because it's just a movie, but it is similar to gifts that some autistics can be given. As for me, I have a high IQ, and I do learn, and when I have a passion for something, I do learn very quickly, more quickly than most people, and I can grasp things even from one sentence. I'll all of a sudden see the whole picture. I'm able to do that. This kept going on, and I was okay because I had my friend with me and my horse had his friend. But in 2011, tragedy struck, and my friend's horse broke a leg and had to be put down. From that point forward, it was just me trying to make my way in the horse world, at one boarding facility after another. Sometimes it was my autism. Somebody who was sensitive or just didn't understand. You know, instead of, they didn't have the coping skills to be able to deal with someone like me. So they would say, I can't deal with you. You're overbearing. I can't deal with you. You've got to go. Other times it was, you have too many special needs for your horse. You know, he has this and this. And because I was taking such good care of him, it was looked down upon by some people. You know, it was, well, you're micromanaging him. You're doing too much. How can you take care of a horse too well? Okay? Now, in February of 2020, my horse colicked with a colic that kills most horses. He survived with absolutely no loss of intestine. He came out of it 100% at 27 years old. And if you know what a strangulated lipoma is, then you will know that that is something that a lot of horses, it takes their lives. Because, you know, it doesn't take long to strangulate that intestine and cut off the blood supply, which backs up toxins and, you know, kills the intestines. My horse's intestinal tract, I was told this by the vets, my horse's intestinal tract was so healthy at 27 because I've always done the right thing and fed him properly and made sure that he had everything a horse is meant to have. He came through it with no problems. So that should have been, and it was, that was a win. That was a win-win. But in the meantime, the barn that I was at, that I had no intention of leaving, got sold to people who everything about it, it was their business. And I understand that. But it was, I don't believe that a business should be to the detriment of the horses. We had nice paddocks. They took them and they cut them down to little dog pens. They were so small, just like that other place way back when, that I started to not be able to give him the care that he required, okay? So I started looking, and I looked, and I looked, and I'm telling you, I couldn't find anywhere. I could not find a decent barn where he could have a paddock that was big enough for him to move, but not so big that he would be eating grass in the spring and the fall. So I got all this ribbon, you know, electrical ribbon and poles, and I would cut off little areas, you know, and things like that to give him some grass in the summer. Because he didn't have any grass, his paddock, it was too small. So I did that. And then in October of 2020, the barn burned down. All the horses made it out safe. Everybody made it out safe, but we had to move like that. Now, I moved to a place of someone that I've known for a long time. I mean, we're never like close friends, just acquaintances. But it's a barn, a beautiful barn that I always wanted my horse to be at. The same kind of thing started to happen where I tried to explain, well, in order for his health, he needs these criteria. That wasn't really the biggest problem, I don't think. But the biggest problem that came in was that when we first moved, we had, now remember I had said before that I couldn't do mornings, and this has just always been my way. I've always found somebody who could feed my horse and put him out in the mornings. It's just, you know, I've always done that. I've always taken care of him myself. Even in full board situations, I take care of him myself. I don't trust anybody else. They don't know what I know about him, okay? And they're not, you know, stickler like me. And my horses survive things, you know. I'm lucky that I got such an amazing horse. It was happening again where certain things would set off my autism. And I really tried to keep it under control. But when we first moved, we had 4 people with us. And one of them was like, okay, I can do the horses in the morning, that's not a problem. So we had somebody taking care of our horses, just feeding them and turning them out to the paddock. I always have my paddock set up. You know, everything's all set. It's like you just have to put them out. left. After like a month or so, he just left. No notice, nothing. He just left, which is extremely unethical. And the three of us to do the horses in the morning, which I understood. But I told them, I explained to the other girls, I said, I'm only going to be able to do this for a short time, because what happens when I go off my schedule, I have a very strict schedule because I work nights and with, you know, my writing and my videos, everything. When I go off of it, even for a day, a week, and this, I'm sure to a normal person, seems really whacked. I can imagine. But what it does is it messes with the rhythms in my brain, and I stop sleeping. And even doing it one day a week, I can do it once in a while. I can do it like, okay, 1 or 2 days here or there. No problem. At that time, a friend of mine came into my life, someone I had gone to school with, and she came back into my life, which seemed like fate. Because she came back into my life because she wants a horse and she wanted to learn all about horses. I talked the other girls into letting me train her for the mornings, and then she would take over my mornings from there, and then I would reimburse her by, you know, we would work on it ourselves. But somehow things got confused. I was told by one of the girls that I can't be involved in the schedule, because I tried to change the schedule to make it fair to everybody, because I wanted to pay the people who were taking my horse out. And being on disability and not yet making, you know, a lot of living yet on my writing and everything, you know, I wanted to be fair. So I approached, and I was met with vehemence and told, well, since your friend is now feeding, you have to feed, you can't be involved. Everything has to be through us, through the three of us. So in my mind, when a couple days did come up where my friend was going to have surgery and I would have to take over 2 of her days, I thought, well, maybe I could get some, you know, the owner of the barn who had helped us once before to maybe do 1 day. I didn't think there was a problem with that because she'd helped us before. So since I had been told that I'm not to be involved in the schedule, I had her ask the owner. For some reason, that caused chaos. And everything just kind of went from there. And I was basically told, well, you know what? You have too many needs with your horse. I can't accommodate them. You have to go somewhere else. Now, by this time, I had already looked for a year for another barn that I hadn't already been to. And, you know, I feel really bad because my horse is doing good there. He's happy. I didn't understand this before. In my mind, I was doing the right thing each time. I was trying to, you know, and she went back and said, well, you know, you couldn't have this, your horse needs this. And we're right back to, you can't take care of your horse the way he needs to be taken care of without breaking barn rules or doing things that I don't agree on, you know. And it's happened again. I'm very upset. I decided to do this video. This is for my YouTube because this is a good example of, excuse my French, but the shit that I have been through for 17 years. My horse is everything to me. He's my son. He's my soulmate. He's my life. He's my therapy. He is a government-registered therapy animal for me. I need him. But I need him to be healthy. And I need to take care of him the right way. And I know what the right way is. I'm willing to compromise. I'll always compromise, because there's always compromises. But it got to a point where I don't think that she saw the compromise. I think it was just, you know, she was new to having boarders. And this is actually the second time I've been to a barn with someone who was new to having boarders and expected everything to be peaches and cream, rainbows and roses. Instead of working with the boarders and saying, okay, your horse needs this, we'll make sure we do it this way. I wasn't asking for anything that would hurt anybody. It would not affect any other horse. It would not hurt anybody. Everything I tried to find a compromise. But somehow it all went berserk. And that is basically, and the reason I'm telling this story is because this story is a good metaphorical example of my entire life, even before I had a horse, with me not understanding and people not saying things the right way. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but they don't understand autism. I don't understand subtle cues. To me, if you're talking to me nice, if you're working with me, everything's okay. That's what I thought. I don't know where to go from here or where we're going to go from here, but looking and hope that someday, between my books, my videos, all the stuff that I do for work, will eventually get me enough money to just have my own place, my own barn, and then everything will be set up my way. I don't know if that's going to happen. My horse is 28 years old. This could take years, but I'm hoping I can give him that someday. And right now I don't know where to go. I've got butterflies in my stomach. I'm in knots. I feel sick. I'm not eating. I'm probably not going to be able to sleep for a long time. But I will be there to take care of my baby. You know, and I will do those mornings that I'm scheduled to do. See, I look back, everything to me is like hindsight when you have autism. It's like, at least for me with autism, everything seems to be hindsight. You know, I didn't understand. And sometimes I need to be hit in the head with something horrible in order to get it. And I tried to talk to the owner and say, look, you know, I'm sorry. I will not let this happen again, but you know, it's her barn. I understand and respect. I've always had respect for her. I thought I was doing pretty well because anytime she needed anything from me, I was always there. I always tried to be there to help. You know, I've gone to the barn at night since I'm up to check on baby horses or goats or whatever, to feed goats. I've tried in the way I can. But sometimes, I guess, I don't know. I don't know because, again, there's that blockage in my brain that makes it hard for me to understand other people and their motives and what do they want unless they actually come to me and, you know, slap me with what they want. And now that I know, I would be able, actually I'd be a whole different person, but it's too late. So I'm going to end this video here. I don't know if anybody's going to see it or enjoy it or anything. Right now my life doesn't seem to be going very well. But thank you for listening. If you did make it this far, thank you for listening. And I'll have more. I'll put links and everything to my other channels, and if you want to check them out. Have a good evening.